en las inversiones en clave ESG, pero en concreto nos vamos a centrar en el componente social, en esa S, cuando describimos el concepto ESG. Y para ello saludamos a Markus Peters, es estratega senior de inversiones de renta fija en AllianceBernstein. Markus, thank you so much for having us a few minutes.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Markus, environmental factors and climate considerations are most talked about when investors speak about ESG. Which is the role that plays the S of social in your fixed income portfolios?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because historically, probably the climate dimension has been the one, as you say, that's been more in the focus. But obviously, social factors play a very important role in our fixed income portfolios, and it does so in two primary ways. The first one is, as part of our overall ESG analysis, we look at the S dimension, the social dimension, and we really think about it in a way of identifying social risk factors and the exposure to these for an issuer. And the second way of really relating to social in fixed income is to think about it from a perspective of investment opportunities.
And let's focus on risks first. What social risk factors do you tend to look at in your ESG analysis, and how important are these?
Yeah, so the first really starting point of this needs to be to define what are the important social factors we want to look at. So we develop a materiality matrix, that's how we call it, and that's really a way of saying here are the material social issues that are really relevant, and then we can look across the various industries we really invest in to identify where do they play an important role. And the idea is that these risk factors are very material in the way they can influence the financial health of a company or its competitive position. And what's implicit there is that in not across all industries, all these social factors are equally important. I'll give you an example. Let's take a medical company and compare it with a renewables company. So first of all, you probably want to weight the social dimension of that medical company, its impact, but also its exposure to certain social risks differently to that renewables business. But also the way you look across the various factors is probably different between those. Nonetheless, you do consider for both a social dimension when you do your overall ESG assessment. So what are the factors we would typically look at? Labor management is an obvious one. If you, for example, have a company with a high share of workers that are part of a union, or you have a very large complex workforce, or you have a workforce that has recently gone through restructuring or through an acquisition, there's uncertainty, that obviously influences what kind of risks there are in terms of overall managing that workforce for that corporation. Other dimensions, social dimensions we will be looking at are, for example, human capital development. It would be health and safety, product safety, as well as something like privacy and data issues, data security.
Markus, you mentioned that we can translate the social dimension into specific investment opportunities. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that's very relevant for our what we call sustainable fixed income portfolios, which use a thematic approach to investing. And there, the idea is really that we look for issuers which we believe that their products and services are contributing positively to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So what we're doing here is we focus on issuers that help advance these SDGs, and thereby we emphasize really issuers that are positively exposed to either changes in secular demand or to structural changes in the economy. So let's kind of make that more specific then to the social dimension. The themes that we're using there are three themes. There's one, climate, two, health, and three, empowerment. So you can already tell from the name of the themes that two are very social focused. And I'll take the most recent kind of episodes we all have been going through, really that changed dramatically our lives, which was COVID. I'm very, very careful to say we are in the post-COVID era. Maybe we're just kind of hopefully towards the end of it. But you can already tell that health has had a huge, or is a huge theme, and is going to stay with us. Access to medicines across the world has been laid bare as a huge issue, and that needs to continue and needs to continue to address. And you can see from what I said before that investment approach would utilize that framework to identify companies that contribute towards it and potentially emphasize these. The other way of thinking about COVID and the impact is we all connect more virtually like we do now. We work more flexibly. So we make use of information technology to an even greater extent. So having access to that key infrastructure is very important. But if I think about how probably my payment behavior has also changed over COVID, much less with cash, much more, for example, by card, electronically. That's something where digital payments are a huge invention and a huge driver in terms of the change in our behavior and the change we use services. And that's really subsumed under that empowerment theme. So you can see how that social dimension, if we boil it down to investment themes, can actually also represent investment opportunities that we can reflect in a broader portfolio context.
And we usually talk about green bonds. I'm sure investors have heard about it. But is there also something like social bonds?
Yes, they do exist. On the other hand, I should concede it's not surprising that people are more familiar with green bonds. They are the much larger part of what we call the ESG labeled bond market. They account for about 2/3. So green bonds account for about 2/3 of that overall ESG labeled bond market. But social bonds account for 15%. So it's not completely a negligible asset class. And I should add, if we consider both sovereign debt and corporate debt, that accounts still for $500 billion roughly in terms of market size. So it's meaningful. So what are social bonds? The idea is pretty much the same as for green bonds. The use of proceeds, so the money that's being borrowed, that is tied to specific eligible projects. So in the case of green bonds, these need to be green financing purposes, green projects. In the case of social bonds, these are really projects that need to be tied, or that are delivering positive social outcomes. The International Capital Market Association, ICMA, they actually define those eligible categories for which, for example, a social bond proceeds can be utilized. And that can be anything from affordable housing to, for example, access to basic infrastructure. So, for example, sanitation, sewer or sewage systems, that kind of stuff. So that would be, if I bought a social bond, that could potentially be something that I support through kind of giving money to that particular issuer, to that particular company. They would be tied to use that money for these projects.
And Markus, can you give us an example of a social bond?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let me actually give 2 examples, because we just said kind of it's an asset class that maybe is less familiar to everyone. So I'll focus on 2. So the first one I'm gonna share is the Bank of Montreal social bond, which was also called the Women in Business bond, because basically how the social bond works is the proceeds are used to either finance or refinance loans that are explicitly made to women-owned businesses. So that's one way of kind of subsuming under the category of socioeconomic advancement and empowerment. That's kind of what we would call that eligible category for which the Bank of Montreal has earmarked the use of proceeds. And then the second one is NatWest. NatWest is a UK retail and commercial bank that does a lot of mortgage lending, and they have what we call an affordable housing bond, where they have kind of selected a pool of loans that is being made to not-for-profit housing associations that really drive the availability of social for affordable housing in the UK. So that's another way of thinking about, okay, what could constitute a social bond? Here, it's affordable housing, and that really tied to lending to not-for-profit housing associations in the UK that make really that affordable housing available within the country.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Markus Peters from AllianceBernstein. Thank you.
Thank you.
Y nosotros nos quedamos